definitely clogged. For several years now, I've been a fan of the Game Awards. I like them. I enjoy it. I enjoy the Game Awards, perhaps more than your average person, if you consider the general discourse surrounding the event. For a brief history lesson, the Game Awards used to be on Spike TV, and it was abysmal. It stunk. It was the most bro-y, Mountain Dew-fueled caricature of hardcore gaming you have ever seen. You think now it's too corporatized? You have no idea. This was so bad. Then in 2015, Jeff Keighley took over and rebranded. And that first show, I felt was a massive improvement. Not just an improvement, but actually good, enjoyable. I made a video on it and everything because in one fell swoop, Jeff took this forgettable event and made it relevant. He made it important. Mixing awards with game reveals made it feel like a mini E3. More importantly though, it had heart. Jeff stuck it to Konami for dropping Hideo Kojima. They introduced an award for lesser known but still humongously influential industry veterans. There were passionate speeches from award winners, and this sense that people from all over the gaming sphere were coming together to celebrate the art of games. It was one night where rivalries dissipated. The barriers between platforms didn't exist, and it felt great. Today, I still feel like it's got entertainment value. If you want to look at it cynically, yes, it is all one big ad. Of course it is. It's a bunch of companies showing you the stuff they're making. It's an ad just like E3 was one big ad. And yes, even a Nintendo Direct is one big ad. All these things are just commercials. But we like commercials because we want to see more of the games we might want to buy. And yes, the event is extremely corporate, stuffed to the gills with sponsors, but I'm okay with that because that's how they make their money, that's how they fund the show, that's why it exists in the first place. It's all very corporate and very silly, but I still enjoy it for what it is. Even if not a lot of good stuff is shown, the fact that something cool could pop up at any time is enough to keep me watching and guessing the winners and overall enjoying myself. That said, the event has been drifting closer and closer back to what it used to be before Jeff came along. And the 2023 Game Awards, there's a lot of negative stuff you could say about it. That same Jeff who called out Konami was nowhere to be found here when everyone wanted some kind of statement on the mass layoffs affecting the industry. The Industry Veteran Award is just gone now. That whole sequence is just not a thing anymore. Passionate winner speeches were cut short while celebrities doing cringy bits got to chew up minutes and minutes of airtime.
Shut up.
And privileged auteurs were allowed to make lofty, flowery claims about their upcoming projects as long as they wanted. And whereas most previous years have shown off a decent spread of games to keep the audience engaged, this year the showing was extremely one note. Long stretches of nothing but high-profile games without more creative stuff to break up the pace. It was more bloated than ever at a ridiculous, absurd 3.5 hours, yet it was probably the most boring it's ever been since the rebranding. I get that Jeff and the other event staff don't have too much say when it comes to how entertaining the show is, or rather, they've got a responsibility to go where the money is. The Game Awards keep getting bigger and bigger, and the more people watch, the more big AAA companies are willing to pay to show off their games. Jeff ain't gonna turn down a hefty offer from no one, so there's less and less room for the smaller, more niche stuff. And whatever the big companies have to show, that's what we get. Some years are simply better than others. There aren't always going to be a lot of exciting announcements, and this year was a bit of a stinker. Now, I do think it's worth bringing all that up because it's a good conversation to have. The quality of the Game Awards has been dipping, and 2023 was a flat-out bad year, I would say. If Jeff wants the show to stay relevant as possible, he's got to strike a better balance. But the real discussion I want to have today isn't actually about the quality of the show. It's a much bigger issue that the show was merely a symptom of. One reason it was so boring was that after a while, all the games started looking the same. You're watching for hours, and the themes, the visuals, the mechanics, everything starts running together. This has been a problem in recent years, at Summer Game Fest as well. Since E3 died, now we look to these two events to receive huge truckloads of game trailers, all from different companies, all at once. And every year, my brain struggles to keep paying attention because it's being assaulted by sameness, blandness. Now, there are obviously still many different popular genres, many different very unique and wonderful games. It's not all literally the same thing. But if you zoom out, look at the big picture, identify the outer points on the chart that are farthest from each other, the amount of overlap within that chart is overwhelming. Fewer and fewer games within this high-budget AAA sphere are hitting the scene with any sort of unique identity or concepts. I'm not going to try and outline the exact genres and ideas that are being overused because this is a pretty nuanced and also very large topic, but I will at least say that every time I saw a trailer for a multiplayer shooter with guys in high-tech power suits shooting zappy guns, my brain shut down just a little bit more. My eyes glossed over a little more and threatened to wander away from the screen. It all runs together into this bluish slop. It's truly amazing that a company can spend $50 million on a game, put out this super flashy trailer to millions and millions of people, and 99% of the chat is going, "Who cares?" And it's because these games really don't have any real identity, which is because they are not projects created by people with something to say, with big ideas they want to make reality. These are cold, calculated products made exclusively because guys in suits at the top of skyscrapers told their studios to make them. Now, I could go on, but I won't, because this idea of trend-chasing, cash-grabby games is not new. The greed of AAA companies, the sameness of AAA games, this is a conversation we've been having for many years now. The fact that it happens is not the issue here. What I want to talk about is how it's currently happening in a way that kind of scares me. It kind of feels like we're reaching a new level, and watching the Game Awards this year, it was unsettling. We've all been discussing the idea of a gaming bubble and its eventual burst ever since AAA became a common household word. Every generation, budgets get bigger. It costs more and more and more and more to make games. If that were the only problem, though, we'd be okay. Higher graphical fidelity means more work to fill in the little details and get a AAA game looking really, really great. But advancements in tech means that many development processes are now streamlined. In many ways, it's easier than ever to make a game. And the industry has grown so big that there are now more people than ever buying games. The potential for profit is huge. But rising costs aren't the only problem. AAA companies are also competing to have the biggest, flashiest games. They're warring with each other to produce the most absurdly lavish game worlds we have ever seen. And in a way, this can be good for the consumer. Companies competing to make their games bigger and better. Well, that's a conflict I can get behind. But of course, bigger and better games isn't the only end product in this scenario. Higher budgets means more aggressive monetization, more overworked developers. And now, an industry where yesteryear's masterpieces are this year's samey sludge. Games that would have made a huge splash in generations past are now essentially cheap schlock. And it's because everyone wants in on this pie. Gaming is huge. If you've got a popular multiplayer game, you have got a money machine. So countless companies are scrambling to put out the next big hit. Again, this is not necessarily new, but it's starting to feel like we're finally reaching a breaking point. The fear has always been that this is simply not sustainable. If this is one big race to the top, and everyone's solution is to just keep pumping more and more and more money into projects and to chase trends harder and harder to reduce risk, eventually something has to give. That's the idea of the bubble. Keep inflating it, and eventually it's going to burst. The AAA bubble has felt like more of a theoretical concept for a while now. You know, we've been watching the bubble inflate for years, but we didn't know if or when it would actually pop. But after watching the Game Awards this year, it's finally starting to feel real. You know, it finally feels like that bubble is stretching to its limit. AAA companies have been expanding so rapidly that they are finally reaching a point of unsustainability. They've been spending so much on these huge AAA multiplayer games, absolutely flooding the market with samey slurry, and it's not working. The live service model can be a big moneymaker, so every game wants to be the only game you play. As long as you're playing, you might be spending. But when dozens, if not hundreds of these games hit the scene every single year, there are only so many players, and they've only got so much time to spend playing sci-fi looter shooters. Making the problem worse, the already successful games are hanging on longer than ever. The Game Awards have multiple categories that are dominated by the same handful of games every year.
Shut up!
Everyone is still playing Dota and Apex Legends. Fortnite is now expanding into its own platform with multiple different games inside it, which is equal parts fascinating and terrifying. There just isn't that much room for multiplayer games, and yet all these other companies are so desperate to get in on the action that they are diluting the market with this similar Slurpee, and fewer games are actually getting enough traction to make any real money. And because return on investment is so low, now investors are starting to get spooked. They're pulling out, taking their money somewhere else, so big projects are being shut down prematurely. Entire studios are being shuttered. 2023 saw a massive, unprecedented round of layoffs across the entire industry. Some of these layoffs are simply the result of greedy executives and poor planning. It's actually common practice at this point to have a really good year, then lay off staff anyway to save money and make it an even better year. It's gross. But much of this is because too many companies started spending too much money building up too many studios to make too many AAA games, and they're starting to realize it ain't paying off. Too many cooks in the kitchen, cooking up so many tacos that now everyone is full of tacos, and the mountains and mountains of unsold tacos are stinking up the place. It's hard not to see this as the bubble finally starting to burst, especially when you consider that games take so long to make. It takes a while before you see the results of any decision or shift in circumstance. If a genre or concept takes off and everyone scrambles to capitalize on it, by the time their games actually come out, they might be too late. And if the industry has been producing too many games for the market to actually handle, it took a while to actually get to this point where it is painfully obvious even to them. That's why the bubble is bursting slowly. The first step is mass layoffs. But despite the layoffs, despite the fact that they might be growing wise to the idea that they have been flooding the market with garbage, what did we see at the Game Awards? A constant barrage of focus-tested, live service products that have taken tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars and several years to produce. All hitting the scene now, all at the same time, all desperate to make back whatever money they can. A trend-chasing live service game is bad enough, but one that no one even has any faith in, that's just sad. Just look at that Suicide Squad game, a generic, always online looter shooter. They revealed it, and nobody cared. It's made by a very highly regarded studio as well, but it seems that their talents were completely wasted in the pursuit of that live service gravy train. And people were wise to the grift. We're all learning what games like this are trying to do. Reception to the reveal wasn't just tepid, it was overwhelmingly negative. So they delayed the game and did their best to address some concerns. Like with many projects, they were forced to course correct a bit. Now they've been showing it off again, and maybe they've touched up some issues, but we still know what the game wants to be, and we still don't care about it one bit. Someone somewhere cares, I'm sure, but the prevailing opinion is... This game, I can't even fathom how much this game costs to make. I will never see that much money in my life. And they're releasing it knowing that it's probably going to flop horribly. Maybe it'll surprise us somehow, but this AAA game is hitting a market that already doesn't care about it. It is a pre-failure. Redfall, same thing. Arcane Studios, super famous, tons of incredible games under their belts, forced to make some generic multiplayer junk. It releases in a poor state and is deemed an instant flop. Another humongous, obscenely expensive game, dead on arrival. Ubisoft, a few years ago, they pledged themselves to the live service god. Say that's the only kind of game they ever want to make ever again. Fast forward to today, their business is struggling hard. They keep making these games and the games keep not working. When Assassin's Creed 4 proved to be so popular with its naval combat, instead of giving everyone what they were asking for, which was a full pirate game, they decided to make a live service multiplayer pirate game. It's been in development for who even knows how long by now. Everyone who's played it says it isn't any fun. No one is excited for it. They keep delaying and retooling it, but they can't seem to make it work. All the while, they are flushing unfathomable riches down the toilet to keep the project going, and they know painfully well that they are about to release it onto an entirely unenthusiastic market that wrote it off completely years ago. Hate to say I told you so, AAA game industry, but I told you so! And it's not because I am so wise and knowledgeable. I'm the only one who really knows what's going on. No, we all told you so. We all knew this was gonna happen. But you did it anyway, and now you and your poor employees are paying for it. This is why when people say, "Oh, you think you know how to run a multi-billion-dollar company better than they do?" I say, yes, I do. They're so blinded by the money, so disconnected from the actual desires and spending habits of their market that many of us could easily run a company better than they could. We literally saw this coming from a mile away and they had no idea. Literally billions of dollars flushed down the toilet, spent on failed products. Even if I couldn't do better, I sure as heck wouldn't do much worse. The AAA industry is turning into a weird ghost town full of extremely expensive mansions that no one wants to buy. Lavish constructions that were built by 1,000 people each, no expense spared, marvels of engineering, and when no one wanted them, they were left to rot. So then, if it is true that we are seeing an unprecedented flood of similar slew and the beginnings of a burst bubble, what does that actually mean for us? What does a burst AAA bubble look like? Well, honestly, it's probably not going to be quite as dramatic as an actual bubble bursting. The gaming market is not going to crash like it did in the 80s, tanking so severely that most people thought video games were just over entirely, just done. Video games, they're done. It's a laughable thought now, but that's just how bad that crash was. Right now, people can literally make games in their own homes, so indies will always be around, and plenty of AAA companies are doing just fine. Nintendo, for instance, is doing their own thing, playing in their own field, and it's working quite well for them. Good games will always exist, and despite everything, we're still getting more amazing titles than we can handle. The industry is not going anywhere. Realistically, the bubble bursting means fewer investors in the AAA gaming sphere. Unfortunately, that means more layoffs, more closed studios, which is awful. And I wish AAA was the only sector to be affected, but plenty of big companies are also funding indie studios, and those are also getting hit pretty hard. On the plus side, though, this all could mean fewer huge companies all competing with each other to produce the next big hit. Fewer sci-fi looter shooters and hero shooters and MOBAs and all that clogging up the Game Awards. And if companies have been less and less willing to be creative and take risks because of their desperation for profit, then less aggressive competition could theoretically mean that there is more room for games that are actually novel and fueled by genuinely good ideas instead of focus groups and checklists and profit projections. The entire market won't crash, but even a stabilization would be a very good thing. To swing back to the negative though, if people stop trying to grab a piece of the pie, that means the ones ones that are already eating the pie get to have it all to themselves. I don't play a lot of multiplayer stuff, so I can't fathom the idea of spending thousands and thousands of hours on one single game. No game is that fun. But a whole lot of other people seem to disagree, and I hate the idea that in the future, even in the far future, all the same games will be popular. What does the future of games look like when the same handful of titles continue to dominate? Not to get too deep, but I kind of fear for kids who grow up playing Fortnite. Not because Fortnite bad, but because if that's all any of your friends play, that's probably all you're going to play. And how are you gonna develop an actual taste for games when all you are is a little machine that's been trained to dump all your money into skins and junk? Okay, reel it in, reel it in. Point is, we've all known the industry has big problems for a while now, but I think things are finally reaching a boiling point, a tipping point, some kind of bad point. After watching that show, I think we might finally be here. The bubble might finally be bursting. And you know what? It's something that needed to happen. It's not going to be fun, and a lot of people are going to be hurt by it, and that is awful. But these big companies, they're going to reap what they sowed, aren't they? You let your greed get the better of you, you make poor decisions. This is what happens. It has been a long time since I've done a classic critical Arlo opinion piece. Well, when was the last time I did this? Honestly, they take a lot out of me, so I'm not super into them anymore. I'd rather just like talk about cool games or whatever. But this has been fun. This is fun. I like this. This has been nice. Oh, and before I go, I streamed the Game Awards. It was super fun. You can find the VOD on Arlo Plays if you want to see me reacting to World of Goo 2 and Flute Guy playing progressively bigger instruments, which is just the funniest stinking thing I've seen in ages. And I've been streaming on YouTube recently, so look out for future streams and check out some of the past ones if you want. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go take a nap. I'm getting too old for this. Got my blood all angried up.